Hello and good week. I'm starting off this video in a bit of an unorthodox fashion. I've been talking to lots of other ministry colleagues and we have commiserated and complained to ourselves and also laughed at ourselves as we've talked about all the sorts of things that go into the making of these at-home sermons or these things that are pretending to be church services, whether they're pre-recorded or live. We're doing the best that we can, and I'd like to maybe go over, before I even get going, some of the process of my my ritual, my Saturday morning ritual as it's come to develop as I've been making these videos. The first thing you've got to do is secure a quiet space. And if you have 3 kids like me, that means that you basically got to sequester your kids and even your wife to other parts of the house, which is a bit of an awkward thing to ask your wife and a bit of a frustrating thing for the kids. And so this week, my wife is out, Kelly is out on a run right now using this as her exercise time. And then I picked 2:30 as my recording time very strategically because that's when I put my 2-year-old down for a nap. And then the other children are upstairs with the strictest orders to stay up there and be quiet and no jumping off the bed. And so I'm going to take you up there and kind of give you a peek into my world, as I know that all of you are in a similar boat, adapting, adjusting. First, we must be very quiet. We're about to go in Abel's room. And as you can see, he's not napping yet. And I might have just hit reset on the whole process just to bring you this. And listen to him as we leave. I don't... Hey, go to sleep, you crazy kid. Love you. So there's one sort of down, but if he's quiet up here, then I should be able to do my work fine. And then you've got the other ones in here. Girls, you don't need to come out, but what are you supposed to be doing right now? They're watching Netflix. They're going to be quiet for the time being. As you can hear, I've disturbed Abel, but I'd imagine he'd be quiet here in a second. But if all goes well, I'll be able to go downstairs and find that I've carved out a moment in the day where I can actually get some work done. Although I've been trying to get work done amidst the making of lunches and keeping the kids entertained and whatever else. You may also notice that I have all the lights on downstairs at midday on a sunny day. That's because I need the light in my workspace to be bright enough to produce a good video. And then lastly, my setup. I've got, my wife would probably be killing me to know that I'm showing you our messy house, but so I've got my tablet set up on books and my stand to hold my phone, which I film with, which that's from my van. Actually, it goes, the suction cup will go on the window, you know, and hold your phone while you're driving. Well, I take it, put it on a plate, set it on some books, and that's about as technologically as advanced as I have gotten. Anyhow, for what it's worth, that's something about my process. And now on with this week's message, this week's sermon. Today's scripture reading is found in the Gospel of John, chapter 20, verses 19 through 31. And it reads, "When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors of the house where the disciples had met were locked for fear, Jesus came and stood among them and said, 'Peace be with you.' After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. Jesus said to them again, 'Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you.' When he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, 'Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained.' But Thomas, who was called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, 'We have seen the Lord.' But he said to them, 'Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands, and put my finger in the mark of the nails, and my hand in his side, I will not believe.' A week later, his disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them, although the doors were shut. Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe." Now, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. As if life didn't already feel enough like the movie Groundhog's Day, where things go on day in, day out, as they did the day before, repetition, nothing much new to look at. I feel that way sometimes on the Sunday after Easter because every year the people who have compiled the lectionary put this text as the recommended gospel reading for the week after Easter. Every year. Other cycles, they'll vary it up, every 3-year cycles, but in all 3 years of the lectionary, A, B, and C, they suggest this as the reading. And so to me it seems as if the people putting it together know that after an Easter Sunday where we talk about a man rising from the dead, that maybe when the dust settles and after the highs, the euphoria of the day have faded away, people are going to have questions. And so we pull out good old Thomas and we dust him off and we decide that he is going to become the patron saint of doubt, but not really doubt, because the punchline of the story for us seems to be the moment where he saw Jesus and then came to believe. I remember sermons on the topic of doubt, and the point of the sermon was always how you fix it, how you get through it, something you slog through, you get through, and then you find yourself on the other side like the patron saint of doubt, Thomas, saying, "Oh Lord my God, now I see it all so clear." And the preachers would say things like, it's okay to doubt for a moment, for a time, but make no mistake about it, doubting was something to be overcome, to get through, to get past, and to put behind you. So I can remember sitting through courses in college. I was a Christian education major, or even earlier in Sunday school classes where somebody might voice a doubt about something or voice out and out disbelief. And I can remember that if the right conclusions weren't reached fairly quickly after the instructor answered the questions, how the room would sort of become a very uncomfortable place for somebody to sit in their doubts. It was almost as if we were being insubordinate or obstructive by raising very reasonable questions. So after Easter, last week we said, He is risen. Christ is risen from the grave. And in the days to follow, if somebody says to you, "Well, I'm not quite sure," you can really understand. I think we should be able to understand the doubt, the disbelief. After all, we are making astonishing claims about the deep realities. And so this year, I would like to bring up Thomas again, dust him off, but not to dismiss his doubt or to move quickly through it, but to notice a few things about Thomas and how he lived in his doubt and how he wasn't kicked out of the disciples club and how he wasn't really rebuked. He just stayed in community and held his doubt in tension with the claims that his friends were making around him. And I should also point out that Thomas did more than doubt. He flat out didn't believe. Very unsettling for religious communities where belief is really more to do with certitude, certainty. We know what we know, what we know. Why? Don't question it, just because we know. I remember there was a woman who went to my church when I was growing up whose husband and go to the church, and for years he would be talked about as a possible prodigal son kind of story. Someday he'll wander in and we'll have a seat ready for him, and then he will muster his way through the doubt or whatever it was that kept him out of the church space, and then he would be the prodigal son returning. But as the years went by, it became harder to view him as the prodigal son. It just seemed like he was never going to show up or darken our doors. So then he became categorized more as an unbeliever than anything else, somebody who was morally suspect and in rebellion with God, as if anyone who is doubting is in rebellion with God. We think it should always be like the good old Thomas story, where doubt is held for a time, and then it's maintained, then it's controlled, and then it trends towards the right conclusions. But what do you do when it's not? When the doubt stretches on forever, or the unbelief stretches on forever? And that's usually the case, actually, more often than not. And religious communities often respond with hostility towards the doubter because there seem to be a threat. I can remember the relief that I felt sometimes when I could fully embrace this line from this gospel reading. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe. Because that was me on a good day, right? The teacher puts down the text after saying that and is saying, in effect, doubt for a time, but eventually you've got to put doubt behind you. Anchor your mind around these claims, and all God's people said, amen. Many of our pastors and our Bible teachers and our professors of religion have wanted us to leave the classroom, leave the sanctuary with that kind of certitude. But many of my friends could not get their minds around the claim, or their hearts in it, or whatever part of their self needed to connect with the story. And then over the years, I found myself more often than not feeling this doubt. So I want to say, for those who have trouble believing, and maybe have been told they should feel guilty for that, people need to cut you some slack. Because we haven't been given the same opportunities that Thomas was afforded in this story to physically touch the wounds of the risen Lord. The disciples, if they had chided Thomas for his disbelief, as church folk often have, would have been wholly unfair, for they had been in the room with Jesus when he made his first appearance. How hard is it to believe in something you've seen with your own two eyes? I wasn't there, so forgive me my doubts. And Thomas wasn't there the first time, so forgive him his doubts. And it seems that's exactly what they did, because, as I said earlier, they didn't kick him out of the disciple club. He was still with them in his doubt because they made space. But these doubts are amplified as we try to mesh this story of resurrected life with our own experience of suffering and death. A loved one dies, and then we are told by some disciple who has seen more than we have, don't fear, it's going to be all right. You just got to have a little faith. Don't doubt God. Don't doubt that your loved one can be resurrected and come to life, and to know life that is better than the life that we tried to carve out for them on this side. We're told by somebody who holds faith in the midst of our suffering, when we have not seen, we have not yet experienced this sort of resurrected life, haven't seen Easter yet. And for those of us who have had trouble in those times, these words seem shallow or like wishful thinking. The question becomes, will we allow doubt, the doubt of those who have not seen, to settle in around us? Do we have the courage to allow the Thomases into the room, into the sanctuary, into the Bible study, and to remain there, even if they never come to see it the way many followers of Jesus do? Imagine a church that could carve out that kind of space with no shame or no guilt heaped on the person. For many churches, the answer has been made already. Will you carve out space for these? And the answer has been consistently through the centuries, no. Today, I'm wanting to carve out room for doubt in this place, this digital place. But then I hope to broaden it when we are able to congregate again in our churches, to cultivate a place where we laud honest doubt as preferable to blindly towing some party line. I have had a long-standing relationship with doubt, and it has strengthened my faith. But the strengthening of my faith was never really the point. It was more reckoning with the doubt and what it said about me and the reality around me. And there have been people who have been patient with me and have loved me wherever that journey might have led or will eventually lead. And for that, I'm grateful. And it's only been possible to sit like Thomas in the doubt because I have found communities of other disciples, other journeyers who encouraged my doubt and walked with me through it. And some even joined me in my doubt. And the ones that stuck with me the most were never trying to lead me quickly to the easy answers or the platitudes or the comfort of just knowing what you know, what you know. I suppose I should point out that the disciples stayed with Thomas, joined with him in his doubt. He says categorically, unless I see it, I won't believe it. And a week later, which means they sat around the dinner table, they talked about these things, and they didn't throw him out. He's still communing with the disciples in the same spaces that they share. He's still sitting in the pew. He's still showing up for class. And this is no different than so many other church communities that I've encountered. And it has consequences. Sometimes it's the best you can do to just try to remain in the community and to be in communion in some fashion with those who have faith in the midst of your doubt. Hopefully, your community will create the space for it that you need. Last year, I visited a young person who was very sick, and she told me that her faith carried her as far as she had gotten. And she said that she had not had any time for doubt. Now, she was what would come to be her deathbed. She had no time for doubt. She said, no doubt, no disbelief, no questions through her ordeal, even though her ordeal was very unfair and very unjust in various ways. And she said that she had no time for those who do doubt. And I was thinking, I'd better be careful because she's sitting across from someone who has often had doubts. I kept that to myself. She said to me at some point, some people come into this room who have caused me to question my faith, and I think they're filled with the devil. There's something evil about them. In the middle of that conversation, it occurred to me to ask her the question, do you think that when you feel weak, you are in some way doubting God? She nodded through tears. Yes. So guilt, shame. And I said, it's funny that you talk about doubt and weakness because this is the week when we, in our churches, talk about someone we call Doubting Thomas. This was a year ago, this time of year, week after Easter, about the same time of year. And she remembered the story from her own Bible lessons growing up. And I pointed out that Thomas was not kicked out because of unbelief or seen as weak for not believing. Rather, he continued to commune with the disciples and in time was given what he needed. In the meantime, I said, don't beat yourself up when you feel weak. And do not equate doubt with weakness. If your doubt is the best you can do, in time, God will give you what you need. This is where your faith finds you. You cannot have faith without its counterbalance, doubt. Faith does not mean the same thing as certainty or knowledge or even belief. Faith is what spans the distance between where you sit and where your doubt ends. That basically sums it up for me. In time, we will be given what we need. Faith finds us in the midst of and because of our doubt. That has been my experience, at least. So doubt, for me, has become a precious word. I think that one cannot fully appreciate what it is to doubt unless you've lived in a world that has seen doubt as a weakness or as even infidelity to one's God. And I've been a part of religious communities that held me and loved me, that had also as its goal the removal of any possibility of doubt. In this world, one talks past doubts as an alcoholic might talk of lapses of sobriety. But I have discovered that doubt is the opposite of weakness. Self-criticism, self-examination, and doubt are the hallmarks of truth, honesty, humility, and courage. I'm a person who loves knowledge of really any kind. I never stop learning, and I'm fascinated by everything, and this tendency has led me to trouble more than once. And I can remember wrestling with conflicts between my faith and reason and finding my doubts and questions shunted aside, discounted, or oversimplified. And I, at that time in my life, found myself a prisoner to my honesty and curiosity, and I was forced to bend my intellect in half and twist it all up and to hold it in conflict with my own lived experience so that I might somehow fit my religious presuppositions into the ever-enlarging world opening up before me. So one night, several years ago, I came to a decision. I had enough. So I said to myself, I will never be afraid of the truth wherever I find it. I said it to myself and I said it to God. I decided that when a new fact presented itself, I would absorb it, assimilate it into all of the other knowledge of things, all of the other things that I thought I knew. And when something could not be reasonably demonstrated to be true, I decided that I would allow it to push against my other prior beliefs. And I can still remember what it felt like to stare up at the stars, walking at night, making this promise to myself and to God, and wondering where it might lead me. And I've never regretted making that promise to myself, to God. Since then, several beliefs have been cast down from the pedestals. At times, my world has had to reorient itself, or rather, I've had to reorient my outlook towards the world. But it's been liberating and even joyous, this journey. And I'm no longer afraid of my mind, but I rejoice in my ability to use it. And I'm not afraid of the people I meet in the world who are in their own ways practicing, experiencing their own doubts and forms of unbelief. The freedom to doubt, my freedom to doubt, has actually given me the ability to actually practice faith. We mistake faith for clear and certain knowledge. We are not faithful when we think we know all the right answers and believe in those facts with certitude. Thomas, get your facts straight. That's knowledge. That's not faith. The difference is very important. I believe that my wife has 2 arms. I do not put my faith in her 2 arms. I believe she has 2 arms, much in the same way Thomas came to believe Jesus had holes in his hands. But I have faith that my wife loves me. There are reasons that I have for believing it, sure enough. But in the end, her faithfulness and her love for me are something that I choose to take by faith. Not a completely blind faith, but faith nonetheless. I cannot put it in a bottle or certify it with facts. Cannot make it formulaic. It's the lens through which I interpret the nature of our relationship and our place in the world together. It's a lens, this thing called faith, that you choose to look through. It's like a lens that helps you look at the world and all of its nuances, and things are then put into a workable perspective. We hold up the lens of the gospel of Jesus Christ and look through it, not because we can prove anything with certitude, but because the lens helps us make sense of the world. I look through this lens, and I see by faith that an unjust world is a wrong world. I see by faith that love is everywhere, and by it all is made beautiful. I see through this lens that there is a power in God that can call life from dead spaces. That's what last week, Easter Sunday, was all about. I cannot prove these assertions by certain knowledge. Some try. I think it's a waste of time. And I can easily see why someone else might not believe them. But to see by this faith has given reality a weight that I intuitively believe it deserves. I would never have become a person of faith if I had not had the freedom to doubt. for a long time, and sometimes still do. If I had never doubted, I would have continued to redefine the word faith as knowledge, and knowledge is faith. Blessed are those who believe without seeing. That's you, and that's me. But if I'm being still more honest, there have been times when I've actually seen. When I've witnessed God's transformative healing wounds and scars. There have been times when I have witnessed the hole in someone's side or someone's broken heart and have heard the testimony of that person, a testimony to the resurrection, the restorative power of Easter. So you may have been listening to this sermon so far and have not really connected to it very much and been a little maybe unsettled at this idea that we might create space for doubt in our own lives and in our own communities. Well, if that's you, then I want you to tell us your story. I know a little bit about what you've experienced. There have been times where I no longer believed without seeing, but rather I saw and I believed. Call me blessed or not, I don't care. These things that I've seen have given me hope. So if you have a story, tell it. A story about the time where you saw with your eyes or experienced in a mysterious way in the midst of your own suffering, the resurrective power of Easter, of God's grace and power breaking through, healing you, restoring you to life. So if you have a story, tell it. That's what Jesus told the disciples to do. Today's text concludes, now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, that through believing you may have life in his name. In other words, tell people what you have seen, what you have found. For those of us who sometimes sit in doubt, tell us your stories, not to convince us with hard evidence, but to be inspired or to be called to a hope that there are loving arms to catch us. But if you are still in doubt, stay. No shame in that. There is room for you here. I may often join you, more often than pastors may care to admit. But the deepest faith is discovered in the midst of, not the other side of, such doubt. Even as you doubt, your faith in something real is still holding you together. I thank God for it. Perhaps someday you will too.